Hey everyone, welcome to another insightful conversation on Elevate Your AIQ. Today I'm joined by serial entrepreneur, market researcher, and technologist Marshall Kirkpatrick. From his days at TechCrunch and Read Write Web to founding the influencer marketing platform Littlebird, which was acquired by Sprinkler, and diving deep into AI-powered market monitoring. Marshall and I go way back to the early days of social analytics, and I learn a lot from him each time we catch up. So this conversation brought back a flood of memories, made clear that some of those concepts are still relevant as ever today, and it sparked a bunch of new ideas. We talk about everything from synthetic personas and social capital, quality of hire, and AI-enhanced team building. I genuinely enjoyed this conversation, and I know you will too. Thanks, as always, for listening to the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I am your host, Bob Pulver. With me today is my old friend, Marshall Kirkpatrick. How you doing today, Marshall?
I'm doing great, Bob. It's so nice to see you. Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely. When did we meet? I was at IBM, and I think you had started Littlebird in the social analytics space, and then you got acquired by Sprinkler, right?
Yep.
And then you've been doing all kinds of fun and interesting and impactful stuff, I might add. Why don't we start with just you sharing a little bit about your background and what you're working on?
Sure, yeah. I have done everything throughout the life cycle of the startup experience. I was the first writer hired at TechCrunch years ago by using data and systems to break news stories. And then I went on to have an editorial leadership role at a wonderful site called Read Write Web. That was a blog for nerds years ago. I'm real proud to build that with Richard McManus in New Zealand. He lived in New Zealand. I live in Oregon. And one of the things I loved doing there, and I think this is how we ended up connecting, was discovering subject matter experts in particular fields. I did that systematically as a journalist to figure out who I should interview for news stories. But then that worked so well, I decided to start a company that did it. So my wife and I founded a company called Littlebird that did data analysis to discover who had the most credibility and connections in any field that you wanted. It's hard to sell a search engine for subject matter experts, so we called it an influencer marketing tool. And that went over a lot better. We raised some money from investors, including Mark Cuban most prominently, did that for 5 years, sold it to Sprinkler. I worked with Sprinkler through their IPO, focusing on selling to the enterprise, running analyst relations, competitive intelligence, data journalism, a whole bunch of stuff. And then I went and worked for a venture firm for a few years, building the same kinds of systems where we discovered subject matter experts in artificial intelligence was the key market there. And now for the past year, I've been consulting for both tech companies and sustainability organizations, doing a workflow where we map out your market, and then we set up systems to monitor what the key voices and organizations are doing in that market, and then we help you take action based on what comes up from that monitoring system.
Awesome. And I know you've got a very hot off the press story in that regard to talk about, which we can talk about right. We can talk about it now if you want.
Sure. Yeah, I was just saying before we hit record, I came in already amped because the system worked. I try to eat my own dog food, drink my own champagne, as they say, and so I've got some of my target markets that I'm doing business in mapped out, and I've got monitoring systems on them to try to pick up opportunities and risks early. And sometimes that uses AI, and sometimes it just uses good old fashioned RSS and technologies like that. When I put the two of them together, that's my favorite. And in this case, my system alerted me this afternoon to a big court ruling that 5 environmental nonprofit groups brought against the Trump administration, arguing that their federal grants being cut was capricious and illegal. And a judge ruled in their favor and said that the grants needed to flow again, at least in their case, but it could, these are 5 different organizations, and it could reverberate out across the whole ecosystem, which would be a really big deal. So the system picked that up, let me know. I looked around, didn't see any press coverage about it anywhere. The case had been followed, a week or two or a month ago as it had been proceeding. But as far as I could tell, I wrote it up first on LinkedIn. But before I did a little AI. I used Perplexity's new Comet browser to have some dialogue and make sure I understood the court ruling transcript, because it was written for specialists, and but that was really helpful. And then I also did one of my favorite plays to run, which was to convene a group of synthetic personas in Claude that had relevant life experience and professional expertise, and have them look over the 80-page court ruling and evaluate my thesis that it was really that the capriciousness angle was notable, was really, what was most interesting there. And so they all did, they thought through step by step, like you like to do with AIs. I like the way Claude does synthetic personas in particular with a good prompt. And so then I quickly scanned over this little focus group of subject matter experts, synthetic ones, and that informed then my pulling up my writing it up. And then I went back into Perplexity and said, who has or is likely to write about this story? And it said, journalists from these kinds of outlets. And so I went over and opened up LinkedIn and fired off messages to those journalists and said, hey, I don't know if you've seen this story yet, but I bet it'll be of interest to you. And here's my write-up on it if you want an overview and a little commentary. So that just did that in the last 15 minutes. And now I got my juices flowing and full of adrenaline for your show.
So what you just covered in the span of 4 minutes brought up like 8 subjects. So I'm going to try to do my best to hit at least 3 or 4 of those. The first is, really glad you're getting good use out of Comet. I have not tried it yet, but I did happen to install it like 3 hours ago. So I am going to jump in and kick the tires. The way that you're able to detect those early signals was, as you probably remember, some of the early work with IBM Research in the social analytics space was really trying to understand the business value. I would say they were early days, not only for the tech in general, but before B2B companies even realized that something like Twitter would be of value to them in different ways. And so in the early days, if you remember, like Dr. Rick Lawrence was working on programs that would basically do anomaly detection in social media, right? So how would you know, if you were an executive at Starbucks and people mentioned Starbucks every 2.3 seconds on Twitter, how would you know if there was like an actual problem in one of your retail establishments? So there's all kinds of ways in the advanced analytics era and early natural language processing and things like that. Certainly way before generative AI, people were thinking about this. And so I think you were certainly one of the pioneers with some of the work that you were doing on understanding like social network analysis and the influence of different people and their, what we used to call social capital of how they, share their expertise online. And one of the things, just to tie this to sort of the space that I've been playing in, which is like talent acquisition and HR tech, literally just had a conversation on LinkedIn about like, why aren't people mining this data? Everyone's complaining about the cost of LinkedIn Recruiter and why I'm having trouble finding quality candidates or whatever. And yet no one is talking about doing social analytics, not in a background check, like is this guy a loose cannon or not? But why aren't you looking at it to see how healthy I debate other people, how clear I am in conveying, my points and my expertise, the way that I might resolve conflict, the way that I trigger, collaboration opportunities. There's a rich trove of this trail that anyone who is active in social media is projecting, and the value of that. So I feel like just like some of the areas from this, if you're what IBM used to call social business transformation and everything around like working out loud and blogging and all the advent of all of that, I feel like we're I'm having deja vu when it comes to social analytics and that influencer kind of mentality as well. In fact, somebody from an influencer marketing team just reached out to me the other day, and it was the first time someone with that actual phrase in their title had approached me about, a potential collaboration or whatever. So you just flooded me with like a whole bunch of little teasers of all these other topics that we can try to weave into the rest of this
That's
conversation.
awesome. So, you were around then to see the transition from when there was just a relatively small number of us saying, there's gold in there in that data. There's an incredible business value to now. I think we won. We won that argument. And now, Sprout Social in particular, the cites this Harris Interactive poll, but there's a number of other polls around that say that, 70, 80% of business executives believe that social data is of fundamental value as a driver of business insights. So, it doesn't necessarily look like we thought it would or we hoped it would, but maybe to some degree it does. But now we find ourselves, having insights like that. And in 10 years, 5 years, who knows, maybe everything will move faster this time. Hopefully people will be. That's a great idea. Looking at people's LinkedIn posts and asking how well do they engage others? Do they spark collaboration? Do they dissent effectively and respectfully? Whatever the case may be. I'd love that.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be just LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn, a lot of people aren't spending their day on LinkedIn. There's other looking at Substack, looking at Medium, looking at, all the newsletters that I get, looking at maybe boot camps that I host or learnings and things
Totally.
like that.
And generative AI is so good at the pattern recognition that can bring those kinds of insights to the surface and make that judgment quickly. I was doing a little experiment last night, Bob. I don't know if you saw my LinkedIn post about how my current system for chatting with my notes, where I've got, I've been keeping notes in Obsidian for years since moving over from Rome Research. And I haven't been satisfied with any of the AI plugins to Obsidian. But what I've done is kind of constrained the scope a little bit, and I've gotten great results by starting a Claude project and honestly starting a timer for 5 minutes each morning. I go and I pull up yesterday's notes in Obsidian. I paste those into my Claude project called My Recent Notes. And then I've got a plugin for Obsidian called Random Note that just opens up a random page in my notes. And I just navigate around copying and pasting for 5 minutes into my Claude project. And, it's huge now and it works great. And it comes to mind in part because, to your point, last night I asked that project. It is my favorite place to chat now, is with this archive of my own notes. But I asked it, what may be true about me that I am unaware of? And it said, you may have some undiagnosed ADHD qualities. And I was like, oh, now maybe, or maybe I've just been pasting years of diverse notes and I see, but it was like, you're particularly good at like creativity and exploration, and you consistently express frustration with logistical, practical responsibilities. I was like, all right. But then it also had some really interesting insights into leadership and values, and illegitimately it picked up some stuff that I hadn't really sat with before, as well as validating some stuff that I was well aware of. And so, but why just point that at myself? Why not point that at, I guess technical evaluations for software developers? I have read just in the last few days, people advocating for that kind of judgment call to be made by an AI of people's code bases and documentation, to say, just like dump in past work and tell me how good are they at collaboration and problem solving and justifying their decisions. And that's a way that AI can be beneficial, as opposed to just being a crutch or what have you for code generation.
Yeah, I also think if you look at that about an individual, so let's say you only have one open rec, right? You only have one spot, right, to fill, then you can go out and use that individually. But I also think if you were gonna, let's say you got funding and you were gonna build a team, right? You could go out and sort of try to understand. You could do some social network analysis or organizational network analysis. Have these people actually worked together before? That could be helpful or at least insightful. Maybe they worked together and they hated each other. I don't know. But you could start to understand correlations and relationships and understand the strength of that, but also look at complementary, skills and things like that. You can't just look at someone's, you know, code base itself or the can't just look at their repo and get all the answers that you need. You've got to take a comprehensive approach, but that's the whole point. If you're going to look beyond a two-dimensional static resume, then this is me. I mean, people are welcome to look at anything that I've posted. I mean, I think you'd have to go back pretty far for me to find me like ranting on Twitter. You'd probably have to go back to the early days of Twitter to find me yelling at the airline for canceling my flight or something like that. But yeah, I mean, but one of the topics that came up within the LinkedIn conversation was around like what do you do? I mean, the stuff's out there now, right? So AI has already scraped it and aggregated it. So if you're going to use that in talent acquisition or college admissions, I don't know if they're looking at that stuff. I should probably know that since my daughter's about to apply to school. But you've got to just think about curating what's out there. You should probably use AI to look like you did, look out for what is Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT, like what do they find about you? Maybe there's some things that you forgot about that probably shouldn't be out in public view and be aggregated by all these AI tools that are gobbling up all the crap on the internet. So I don't know. In some ways, I see a sort of tie to human centricity and responsible AI to be able to have the forethought to know enough about how AI works to know that it's going to grab some stuff, and you might want to check, just like you should check your credit report and you should check your, other criteria that's out there that could be used against you, or maybe it's not accurate, and you need to, sort of go through whatever steps you need to go through to try to resolve that.
What are those steps though, Bob? I mean,
Yeah,
I'm trying to get like my realtor to remove photos of the inside of the house I bought from Zillow via RMLS listings and stuff, and like that is, and I'm hoping it'll work. But that's like a tried and true path there to, you can get that done. But if Perplexity or ChatGPT says Bob Pulver has no sense of humor, what are you going to do?
well, perhaps paradoxically, I would ask AI, how do I get rid of this stuff, right? Because honestly, sometimes we try to come up with new problems for AI to solve, but AI has not helped us solve some of these everyday challenges, right? People talk about that all the time. Like I don't want more time to like do my laundry. I want AI to do my laundry. Let me do the stuff that I want to do. Just because AI can do something doesn't mean that it should. But sometimes that's up to human judgment. Some people don't mind doing a little bit of administrative or drudgery kind of work because if you can't run an engine in the red line all the time, right? You got to come back to idle at some point. So I think we need to be realistic about taking away all of the things that allow us to decompress, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I don't want to do that at all.
The other thing I was just going to mention, just back on the influencer marketing thing. I mean, I think you were part of the work that I did. So when I left this role in the IBM Solutions Lab working with research, I went to market intelligence, and that's when they started this whole influencer relationship management group on my social insights team. And so it was tools like Little Bird and a couple others that really got us to give us like the intelligence and the horsepower to go out and look across all these analysts across all these different spaces and start tracking that to the point where we actually incorporated some visualizations of that into the IBM's like social media, command center that we eventually built outside the CMO's office. So just I guess I say that because I think that kind of stuff is still relevant today, but also to give you kudos, early days, like you guys were just putting out some just like incredibly valuable stuff, and you were ahead of your time.
Oh, thanks, Bob. That's really kind. I really appreciate your saying that. Stories like that, sometimes they come up years later. Yeah. And you didn't know. And yeah, if I had grandkids, someday I'll tell them that story. But that's,
I want to take a break real quick just to let you know about a new show we've just added to the network. Up Next at Work, hosted by Gene and Kata Keel of the Devon Group. Fantastic show. If you're looking for something that pushes the norm, pushes the boundaries, has some really spirited conversations, Google Up Next at Work, Gene and Kata Keel from the Devon Group.
well, it may, my other IBM story was also, it was a point of pride, but with less oomph, perhaps. I don't know. Right? We had a big proposal on the table that we were working through for IBM. And I was like, oh man, this is going to like make our startup if we can close this deal. And then the line of communication went real quiet for a long time. And then I heard back from our champion at the time, sorry, we decided that Watson is going to do what you're. And I was like, man, if I got to lose a deal, losing to Watson at IBM is an honor. Happy to do that. So
That's like losing to Ken Jennings at Jeopardy.
exactly.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really funny. Yeah, those are some fun projects for sure.
You got me thinking of something here, Bob.
Yeah.
Can I explore an
Please.
angle? Okay,
Yeah.
so this idea of looking at not just one candidate in isolation, but imagining how they might, work in concert together feels like just a great use of like the scenario building capabilities of a generative AI. I once did a Delphi dialogue synthesized between Mark Zuckerberg, Gloria Steinem, and Jesus Christ. And the outcome was it was fantastic. But that kind of hypothetical, like how might these things, synthesized combinatorial ideation, one might call it, feels like it's like fast, cheap, and good enough to really be helpful. I was on this call yesterday with a funding organization for watershed enhancement and restoration projects about their strategic action plans. And they said, if you don't have a strategic action plan, don't even bother us because we're not giving you any money. So here's some examples of like what good strategic action plans look like. And they had this model where they said, if you've got a desired outcome, and this could be, true for any organization, in their model, they say, we're going to start with we want to know what your strategy is, with the understanding that strategy is going to lead to usually more than one action. And those actions are then going to lead to an output. And then those outputs are going to like go through the world in this stochastic universe we live in. They didn't say that, but basically, hopefully the outputs are going to drive some kind of outcome. And most outcomes in their experience in a biological kind of thing, and maybe arguably in any kind of context, require the input of more than one strategy. And so articulating and justifying, what are the modular steps in that model of strategy, action, output, outcome, and being able to defend, you're like, no, I really believe that if we take this action, it's going to come to that output. But especially the output to outcome, that last stage, I feel like you could take multiple candidates for a team, for example, and run scenarios that go through multiple steps and say, first, what is this person likely to output in terms of work product? And then if we do that with multiple different people, what are some possible outcomes resulting from the intersection of this work output from this person with this skill set, this background, et cetera? And I bet most of these AIs could sketch up some like credible and useful and interesting scenarios that would be helpful in determining which team compositions might be more effective than others. I don't know that I want to defer to its judgment necessarily, but in the spirit of, plans are worthless and planning is invaluable, I think I would want that kind of cognitive brain power to run the combinations and generate the scenarios in the room for me to evaluate those possibilities and determining which combination of team members might be most effective.
I love it. That is an incredibly powerful potential solution, even as a thought exercise to basically combine. It's almost like a microcosm of strategic workforce planning, but on the talent acquisition side, combined with scenario planning to say, okay, let's say, these things, happen or whatever. So yeah, you could play out scenarios based on the candidate profiles, hopefully like rich candidate profiles that includes some of that, social data, but also the interplay between them and how that's going to go. You're also getting me thinking about even just relationships in general, expanding upon any sort of psychometric whatever that you're using to sort of help. Maybe it's helping a leader understand how to better communicate with specific people based on their own personalities and that kind of stuff, but taking that to the extreme and then thinking about it more broadly, because as talent acquisition tries to focus more on meaningful metrics like quality of hire. So I don't know if you're familiar with that metric, but it's one that's talked about all the time, but nobody has a consistent way of measuring it, if they measure it at all. But at the end of the day, if you don't have quality, candidates, or they're not sticking around long or whatever, then there's money just flying out the window with that, because now you got to go hire somebody again, or you got to shuffle people around. It affects morale. It affects engagement levels. There's a lot of downstream ramifications to making a bad hire, right? And so those kinds of deep, insights is an example of, how you can improve some of those metrics across the talent lifecycle. And then, that sounds
So
amazing.
you can't just use the ice hockey, like time on ice correlations with points scored metric.
Well, the highest performing employees are lacrosse players from Dartmouth. Did you know that?
No,
Yeah.
no.
If you play lacrosse and went to Dartmouth, like, you can do anything.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
So yeah, I mean, you've got to obviously do thorough evaluations of all of these things, and you've got to, maybe like you were already alluded to before, using like synthetic, profiles and stuff like that. But I do think that's a very worthwhile pursuit, and I haven't heard of anybody doing.
So I did something similar a little while ago for an organization that issues grants to a big network of other organizations in such quantity that they struggled to keep up with the activities of all their grant recipients. And the grant recipients maybe weren't great at reporting consistently. We built a system that monitored and summarized the announcements and campaigns of the different teams that had received grant financing. And then, there was like 500 of them over the period analyzed. And then I wanted to explore which of these teams should know about specific projects that their peers are working on, because project A and project B, if brought together, could be greater than the sum of the parts, in whole. But there are if there's 500 updates, there's like 500 prime number of potential points of intersection and all that. So I did a little experiment where I took the list of all the announcements and I went over to Google Notebook LM, that I think had the biggest context window at the time, or just for whatever reason that felt like the right tool to use. And I said, do a bunch of combinatorial analysis of, to describe the situation. And it did. And then it spit out, project A could be made aware of project H, J could be told of C or whatever. And then I went over to, I had some like crude ranking in the output there, but then I went over to Perplexity and I took the top 100 of those or so. And for each of them, I said, score, tell me whether this is like high, medium, low, or none for transformative potential, strategic alignment. But those, the top ones are all a go on that. The two most interesting angles were geographic proximity because of Perplexity's web search. They can go grab legit and discoverable history of prior collaboration. And so you find me two projects that are close to each other geographically, but have never worked together before and are like high impact potential combinations. And that feels like something for the network administrator to really see as a strategic opportunity to drive more value from the network.
That aligns with some of the observations I saw at IBM and since in terms of like hubs of innovation and locality and centrality of some of that expertise kind of fuels into that. But I also remember, I guess I have memories of the opposite situation where, for example, IBM, I don't know how many research labs they have right now. When I was left in 2016, they had about 12 research labs. I remember when I was spending a lot of time in the social analytics space and trying to present the best of research to C-suite, clients. There were at least, my monitor's about to kick off. There were at least 6 different labs all working on social analytics projects, right? But they were all completely, they couldn't have been further apart, right? It was like San Jose, New York, Beijing, Tokyo, Haifa, and maybe one other one. And so they're all, I remember bringing it up because I was like, guys, like, how is this different than this? And so researchers' perspective at the time in their defense was, we want to let 1,000 flowers bloom. We don't yet know if these guys may go in slightly different trajectories. To your earlier work, maybe one of them is focused on, influencers and building, knowledge graphs around that, or anomaly detection or whatever. So some of it really did tie to where they were going, and if they got interest early from a client, that could dictate the trajectory of the research as well. Maybe it goes into a specific industry, and unless you have cross-industry expertise who are cross-pollinated across that network, then something that went into industrial sector is not going to make it to automotive or retail, for example, right? So there was some method to the madness, but as a relatively objective observer who's trying to be a sponge and understand what all these different projects are, so that when a client comes to me with a challenge, I know which lab and which project to point them to. This is where AI, and even before I left, I saw next generation of Watson kinds of things where it could go out and scour everything and look for those sometimes weaker signals.
Yeah.
About how to pull those things together. So, yeah.
So one of the experiments that I've done similar that comes to mind around that was with my LinkedIn contacts, where I would export them as a CSV, put them into a Google Sheet, and then use the browser plugin GPT for Sheets to make API calls based on the cells in the sheet, where I would take the person's contact info and create a new column that says, make me a list of topics that this person has either explicitly or implicitly demonstrated expertise in. And it'll go beyond what they list on LinkedIn, to do everything you find about them on the web, and then write up that little summary. And then I've like decorated my LinkedIn contacts with these tags, essentially, based on their web histories. And then I took that CSV and I put it up into a Claude project so that I can say, hey, I'm about to go into a meeting with somebody in this kind of organization. I suspect that they're probably working on these kinds of things, or I believe they are. Who in my network might be most relevant to that? And it'll do not keyword, but like fuzzy matching, essentially. It was one of the beauties of generative AI to say, oh, on that spreadsheet that you showed me, like these 3 are the ones closest to what you're looking for.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. There's not enough people right now, because we are still in the early sort of honeymoon phase of all this, I guess, but everyone is just sort of either blinded by or building themselves a bunch of sort of low-hanging fruit, shiny objects, or it's really more automation than AI. And I just feel like some of the scenarios that we're talking about are where I'd like to see us moving towards, right? Not just doing things, faster, but better and generating higher value, or being able to help us solve challenges that no small group of humans, no matter how intelligent or how powerful their collective intelligence is, that there's some things that you still can augment human intelligence and human collective intelligence. You can still augment that with AI to run through some of those scenarios or find those hidden or weak, signals, looking, many degrees of separation away. But in aggregate, you start to get a little bit more clarity in the scenario or the picture where this potentially could go. Now there are a lot of variables that could, that sort of, or allow that to sort of skew in different directions, but nonetheless, you're still gaining new intelligence, right? You're still getting new insight that you didn't have before, and you're solving a problem that is no longer insurmountable. It's still difficult, it's still complex, but you now can start to see the potential light at the end of this tunnel, and that's what I want to see us use AI for. And I think it'll take some time, but I don't know. I'm so I'm in this neck deep, so I just see a lot of I don't want to call it nonsense, because you got to clear out some of the brush before you can really see where you really want to go and get to those higher value activities. But I just don't want people to get too sort of mired in, what's so great about this, or why is AI better than automation, or why is, how is this such a big sort of revolutionary leap as opposed to an evolutionary step?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's power laws and there's maturity models, right? I wonder, it makes me think of, the Gartner maturity model for enterprise adoption of artificial intelligence, like 5 years ago or so. I remember getting to the last stage where they said, all right, here's what, the ultimate state of maturity looks like in this. And a number of companies in the world doing this. I think that, if memory serves me correctly, they were like 2, or something like that. And I'm like, oh, wow. So there's always going to be, this power law of value, and hopefully we can do this differently than we did the social media era, where like the largest amount of value may be captured by antisocial actors who, instead of pushing the envelope of pro-social sophisticated use cases, are instead turning themselves on the base level of users, and just like mining them contrary to their own well-being and interests, and to the detriment of us all.
Before we move on, I need to let you know about my friend Mark Pfeffer and his show, People Tech. If you're looking for the latest on product development, marketing, funding, big deals happening in talent acquisition, HR, HCM, that's the show you need to listen to. Go to the Work Defined Network, search up People Tech, Mark Pfeffer. You can find him anywhere.
Because that's what it feels like. There's still wonderful, incredible things going on in social media. It has delivered on a lot of its potential and promise. But the resources and the political impact, like really so much of it has been antisocial.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. One thing I wanted to circle back on, Marshall, was you were talking about using Claude and this sort of multiple personas, synthetic personas. So just for my understanding, and certainly for a lot of listeners that haven't gotten that sophisticated with how they're using some of these tools, how did you, so within one assistant, Claude in this case, you're able to say, instead of just saying, okay, you are, a copywriter, or you're playing this role, you actually give it a more complex, comprehensive prompt or series of prompts that say, okay, I'm going to set up, I'm going to give you profiles for 3 personas. The first one's this, the second one's this.
No,
Like,
not even that. It's
how did you do that?
I really set it out to do something more complicated, and I may have. This was at least heavily influenced, if not outright borrowed from the guys over at Every, Dan Shipper and team. So I've got this saved prompt that basically says, I want you to generate a list of 10 personas that have relevant demographic and professional experience related to the following question. And then there's a blank in my Google Doc that I copy from. And then after that blank, I say, now I want each of those 10 personas to think through the question step by step. And then once that's done, I want you to create an amalgamated, anonymized, like collective response. And then I go in and I type in my question. Like, just before the show here, my question was, review the attached PDF and tell me what the most notable parts of it are. And is the capriciousness angle really what's most notable? And then I uploaded the PDF, 80 pages long, from the district court, and it looked at it and it's contextualized and it said, all right, you need, an environmental lawyer, you need an environmental justice activist, you need and it knew exactly, what you need, a conservative farmer, 10 different personas that were related to the rest of the text. And then they thought it through with like 5 or 6 sentences each of like, well, in my experience, I often see, and I'm like, yeah, that seems like pretty credible, I take it with a grain of salt, but like it all, it's the way that these are connection machines. I think, it didn't just pull the conservative farmer POV out of nowhere. It pulled it out of, a vector map of concepts and terms surrounding the words conservative farmer. And I didn't even say conservative farmer. It just saw what the court case was about. And it was like, related to this would be a conservative farmer's point of view. And yeah, it works great.
That's fascinating. So the synthetic personas. So one of the reasons why that sparked my curiosity when you mentioned it earlier is I was literally on a call this morning where you would actually love this call. It's this community and group I'm part of called Content Evolution. It was started by this really smart guy named Kevin Clark, who worked at IBM with me on some of the Smarter Planet work and some other stuff. But yeah, he convenes a lot of these like really like deep thinkers and like guys who have been in tech. I mean, some of the stories were amazing. There are people who have spent time with Steve Wozniak and early days of Apple and like just, Motorola and smartphones, and it's amazing. But one of the guys is now doing a bunch of projects related to market research and using AI in market research. And apparently people are sort of falsifying their credentials so that they can get tapped to participate in highly compensated focus groups. And so to mitigate that, he's been using synthetic personas and using those as the focus group, a bunch of synthetic personas.
Pick out, identify, spot the rube or spot the ringer or whatever might be another interesting game for that. Sometimes one of the ways I fact check is I'll have like ChatGPT or Claude put together a bunch of research on something, and I'll look at it and I'll say, yeah, okay, I buy most of that, and then I'll put in a fake fact into it and put the whole collection with the fake fact into Perplexity and say, please go do web search and verify all these facts. And it'll go through and it'll be like, point 1, there's plenty of evidence of that. Point 2, plenty of evidence of that. Point 3, hold on a second. There is no evidence that this is true. I'm like, oh, you got it. Picked out so you could do the same thing with, like evaluating participants potentially as like, which of these are credible, like real subject matter experts, and 9 out of 10 of them are synthetic or whatever, but one is a bullshitter.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, it's like, what we need to do background checks on the participants, survey participants now, but if it's a focus group and you're paying, like apparently people they just looked at the available, research groups or whatever, some site where you can find that.
They're bringing their AI too. It's a cat and mouse arms race of like, you you're not really who you claim you are, but my AI says I am. Oh, but just perpetually.
Right. Or just, they were just looking at it like, okay, this one who's looking for, doctors pays 10x. So, all right, today I'm going to be a doctor, right? But so when I first heard this, I was relating it to talent acquisition, where people are using a second device in the middle of their interview, which is a whole nother topic that we don't have time to get into today. But it's like, is that okay or not? Are you being resourceful? Give me a break. Are you like, what is the expectation, right? And what does common sense tell you, and what does ethics tell you, right? If it's fair game, have you requested an accommodation for some reason? If so, let's talk about it. If not, like, can we just have a human-to-human conversation where I understand how your brain works?
Well, I paid good money for this implant, Bob. And Elon Musk tells me that I can sneak a fast one past you.
Right. Well, so the broader issue is, again, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole with talent acquisition and candidates sort of faking it till they eventually make it. I was thinking about it in terms of like synthetic, like if you needed the collective intelligence of a group, either within a domain or across domains, like maybe an AI governance council or an AI ethics council, or maybe it's getting a second, third, and fourth opinion all at the same time for a tough medical case or whatever it is, right? Like, you could go about that one of two ways. One is do what you do and help go out and identify that expertise by actual evidence that's trusted, that can't be manipulated. It's implicit. It's already out there. I'm not giving you false information specifically to join this group, right? The information is out there and it is what it is once you've vetted it and validated it. Or you go out and say, well, I don't need those specific people. I just need expertise in those domains. And therefore, I don't have to pay anybody. I can just pay this service that gives me those synthetic personas.
Yeah, that's kind of like the T-ball of focus groups too, arguably. I mean, I do it every day and I really like it a lot. But at times when I've had access to some of the like expert research networks, like I can't remember what the one that I used to use in particular was called, but one of those like bounty-based interviews kind of deal where, Tegus. I've used one called Tegus, where when you subscribe, the understanding is that they'll go out and interview people in former leadership positions that in companies or sectors that are of interest to you, and you get to read the interview, but in exchange in that network, you also get to read the interviews that everyone else has commissioned. And so there's just this feed of like, today, 35 different, there was a product manager from OpenAI that got interviewed. There was a Chevron vice president. There's someone from procurement, and they're amazing. And I mean, a synthetic persona, I mean, maybe I could ask it with some of the new ones, just go deeper, go longer. But there is an authenticity and a timeliness and a subjectivity, a value that like a real human expert, I think, it's not cheap and it's not fast. And in the project management, fast, cheap, good, pick two. And these synthetic personas, they are fast, they are cheap, and they may be good enough to get started, to come then engage with real humans from a more informed perspective too.
Yeah. Well, I think, the third, I said there were two options, taking the real people or taking the synthetic people. But I mean, there is a third option, which is the digital twins of those real people, right? And so you mentioned Delphi before. I don't know if you met this
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was just coming to mind again now too. Yeah, the Delphi process where the answers to the questions are anonymized by the facilitator, and you don't know who in the groups. And now they are an expert because only experts got invited to the group. But it's the facilitator's job to strip out all the social hierarchy and signaling and stuff and social pressures to just get the answers. And then people do call and response back and forth through multiple layers of that. Oh, it's just delightful. But who says all those have to be human?
True. That is true. I guess depends on your objectives and where you might, I guess there's a lot of variables, but I was thinking about it because one of the other things that comes up, and as you might imagine through these future of work discussions, not just future of work, but future of the workforce, is so I have one of these digital twins. It's not on Delphi. This group, Content Evolution, actually helped me build they call it digital advisor. If I have a digital version of me, but it's not through all the things that we just talked about, scraping all my social exhaust and all of this stuff. I didn't feed it my, Substack and my LinkedIn, nothing. It was based on an interview that I did that, assessed, the way that I think, the kinds of problems and transformation projects that I've worked on, innovation work that I did at IBM and NBC, et cetera. And so, but obviously I could augment that with everything I just described and make it a pretty good representation of me. And then if I were working for another organization, then you get into a whole, argument over who actually owns the intellectual capital and intellectual property that has now basically been digitized. So it's not exactly me. You're not going to obviously have my human, traits, and you're going to lose some context and, things like that. Certainly won't have my incredible sense of humor, as you mentioned before. But you've got like 80% of Bob. So like
80% may be a recipe to go straight into the uncanny Bob Valley.
That is a lot of Bob. That's a good
but
percentage
it may
Bob,
be
so.
It may be eerie. It may get people to, Azim Azar wrote about GPT-5 this morning in Exponential View, best analysis of it I've seen yet. And one of the things that he talks about is as the error rate gets smaller, each mistake that does come out like stands out more and bothers people more. And then if you chain them together, in particular, like, this thing is right 99% of the time. Well, I was going to have it do 10 things in a row, and now suddenly the error rate, or 100 things in a row, suddenly the error rate compounds.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I do get that newsletter. He's a really bright guy. Yeah, I guess, again, in that work context, I just think about some of the things, we're entering strategic planning, season, and like who gets to be in that room, working on these problems. I mean, is it just based on seniority and title? This is your group. I need to know what your plan is, or do you now have the ability to, tap into people who actually have the knowledge and insight and expertise, and a lot of that exists far beyond the four walls of that proverbial room.
Totally. Hey, can I tell you? Can I conclude with a story about another experiment I just did?
Of course.
So I made what I call it my counter evidence bookmarklet, where I used Claude to write up a little JavaScript so that when I'm on a web page, or if I'm typing even a LinkedIn post or whatever, and I highlight, if I highlight some text or just web page in general, you click the button, it copies all the text on the page to your clipboard, appends at the very beginning prompt that says, read the following information and use web search to gather the most credible counter arguments and evidence to this perspective. And then it opens up a window to ChatGPT, and you just paste your clipboard, hit enter, and then it goes. And with GPT-5, I opened up this CNBC article about inflation rates, just on a lark this morning. I hit the button, and 2 minutes later, it's like, well, actually, like, here's a bunch of counter arguments to what this press coverage said. And so now you got to be like, you have to evaluate all of the claims and counterclaims, on their own merits. But yet, really, like, would you want to do otherwise? Would you want to just like read, something without like asking the smartest AI in the world, why might not this be true? Or why might this not be true? Why might this not work? I've been doing a sales objection, discovery, anticipation kind of thing similarly. This is what I'm going to try to sell to this organization, for this. Why might it not work? And it does a great job of raising potential sales objections.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think that would be incredibly valuable for most of the population who are just obviously we're in a very sort of divisive, time right now. And so your beliefs and convictions are very, very strongly influenced by where you're getting your source. And even the sources, I try to keep an open mind about a lot of these things. And to your point, I mean, I saw two stories this morning about inflation, and they two conflicted, right? One was, oh, it didn't go up as much as possible. Oh, but if you look at the wholesale,
Well, and that kind of like in-group deference, like, has been calorically efficient, throughout history. My dad sent me a link to a PBS Nature documentary, 7-minute clip on some climate science, and I was like, "Oh wow, Dad, thank you for sending me this. This is really good." I was kind of surprised that he sent it to me, but then he sent me a PragerU like climate denier video, the next day. I was like, "That's more what I was expecting." And like, do I have the time to evaluate both on their own merits, or do I make do I judge the messenger, in part? Yeah, you got to do that. And, it depends on looking at the internal coherence, maybe pushing a button no, that's what I should do. I should look at the transcript of that PragerU thing, have my counter argument workflow, pull up all the evidence of why that guy's wrong, and I'll just type "I love you" at the end and hit send and and reply.
There you go. Well, you have done quite a bit of tinkering with some of these new tools, and you gave me some ideas certainly to go and kick around. So thank you for that, Marshall. Always exciting and insightful to chat with you and hear what you're working on. So thanks so much,
Bob,
for joining me.
I really enjoy our friendship and this opportunity to talk about all this the stuff we both are so excited about in public.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anytime. All right, Marshall, I'll let you go. Thank you again, and thanks everyone for listening. We will catch you next time.